before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The rain had been falling for hours. Not in a storm, not in any dramatic downpour. Just that steady, endless kind that soaks through your jacket, fills the creases in your boots, and seeps into your thoughts. You hadn't meant to walk this far, hadn't planned to leave the gravel road and follow the sloping deer path down into pines. But there was something strange in the air this evening, something pressing, as if the forest had tilted toward you, guiding your steps without your knowing. Twilight faded, and the world dimmed to the soft blue-gray of a forest soaked in silence. Trees lined your sides like sentinels, too tall, too quiet. The branches overhead swayed gently, but the leaves made no sound. Only the rain persisted, whispering against moss, bark, and earth. You pulled your collar higher. Up ahead, the path curved around a cluster of boulders that looked almost too perfectly placed. There was a hollow space beneath one, dark and oddly inviting. The idea of shelter was too tempting. Your legs were tired. Your pack felt heavier than usual, and the wet cold had long since reached your bones. You ducked into the hollow and sat with your back to the stone, legs pulled close for warmth. That's when you heard it. Not thunder, not wind, something else. A scratching sound, faint and rhythmic, coming from underneath, not just under the stone, beneath the forest floor. Slow, deliberate, almost like claws. You held your breath. The sound stopped. Moments passed. Then nothing. Just rain. Just a slow drip of water pooling at the edge of the stone. You try to settle in, convincing yourself it was just an animal, a squirrel maybe, or a branch shifting in the soil. That's all. Still, your eyes scanned the trees beyond the path. And that's when you saw it. At the edge of the trees, just where the fog began to thicken, a small orange glow flickered to life. A lantern, not hanging, not resting on the ground, just floating midair, perfectly still, humming softly as the flame inside danced. You blinked, rubbed your eyes, and for a moment it vanished. But when you looked again, it was closer, still floating, still glowing, still burning through the fog like an open eye. You didn't move. The forest held its breath. So, did you? The rain continued to fall. You stayed under the stone longer than you meant to. The glow had faded. Or maybe it had blinked out the moment you stopped staring. But your legs wouldn't move. Your body had grown tense, stiff from cold and fear, even though nothing had actually happened. You told yourself it had been an illusion, a reflection, some trick of moisture in the air catching a far-off light. Still, you didn't believe that. The rain had grown softer now, almost fragile, like a whisper across glass. The trees around you loomed taller in the dusk. Every trunk was a silhouette, every branch a finger. You stood slowly, shouldering your damp pack again. The warmth of the hollow was gone. A few more steps along the path and you found something new. A large hollow tree, its bark gnarled like twisted rope, its interior a yawning black wound. You hadn't noticed it before, and that was odd. It wasn't far from where you'd been. A tree that size should have been visible from the path. You approached carefully. There was no sound inside, no animal noises, no rustling, but the hollow felt strangely warm. A faint scent of old firewood and damp leaves lingered. With the rain pressing down and night thickening around you, the choice was easy. You ducked inside and sat with your back to the inner wall. It wasn't comfortable, but it was dry. Your breathing slowed. You shut your eyes for a moment, and the scratching returned. But this time it wasn't below. It was from behind you, inside the tree. You bolted upright, spine pressing against the bark. Silence. Then, faintly, you heard something shift above, deep in the hollow's unseen cavity. Not an animal, not wind, breathing. Very shallow, very slow, as if whatever was had just noticed you. Two. You didn't move. You didn't even blink. Your pulse thudded in your ears, louder than the rain now. And then, from the corner of your eye, just outside the hollow's entrance, the lantern was back, closer now, flickering, and gently swaying, like it was hanging from something unseen. The breathing stopped. You stepped out of the tree before your mind caught up with your body. The air outside felt colder now, colder than it should have in early autumn. The fog had thickened, crawling low along the forest floor. The lantern was still there, waiting. Then, from deep within the woods, you heard the first voice. It didn't shout. It didn't call. It simply whispered, "Follow." You didn't want to follow it. Every instinct inside you begged you not to. But the forest had shifted in some subtle way. Something behind you had changed. The trees no longer felt passive. They seemed to lean in closer, their branches drooping like arms closing around your escape. The trail behind you was darker now, more tangled, less there, so you turned to the lantern. It hovered still, 10 paces ahead in the mist, not swinging as a hanging light should, not swaying with the wind. Just there, a low hum came from it, not mechanical, not electrical, a vibration in your chest more than in your ears, a presence. You stepped toward it. The rain made no sound on the leaves anymore. You noticed that suddenly. It should have. You were surrounded by canopy, broad pine boughs and dripping ferns. Yet there was no patter, no splash. Only your footsteps in wet soil. Only the hum of that orange flame. When you reached the lantern, you stopped. Up close, it looked old, iron and cracked glass, glowing with a dull amber light that didn't flicker so much as pulse. There was no wire, no post, no chain. It hung from nothing. And as you looked closer, the path behind it unfolded, slowly, like something parting a curtain. The fog thinned only in one direction, revealing more forest, but not the kind you remembered walking through. These trees were too close together. Their bark was darker, almost scorched in places. The ground dipped subtly as if leading downward, away from the world you knew. And at the end of that path, further down and deeper in the gloom, another lantern flickered on, just for a moment, then off, then on again, then it stayed lit. The voice whispered again, clearer this time, as if just behind your ear. You can't stay where it's safe. You turned, but no one was there. The forest remained perfectly still. You looked back to the lantern. It had begun to move, slowly, floating forward, leading. You hesitated once more. And then, only because the air behind you felt suddenly wrong, like the breath of something vast and ancient leaning in too close. You followed, step by step. The second lantern waited. And somewhere far behind you, inside the hollow tree, something laughed. The forest no longer made sense. The path between the first and second lantern had no trail, no footprints, no broken twigs. But you followed. You had to. The space between the trees was narrowing the further you walked, as though the forest didn't want you wandering elsewhere. When you reached the second lantern, you noticed something you hadn't seen before, a mark etched into the wood of the tree beside it, a narrow oval scratched deeply into the bark, not recent, but not old either. Inside the oval, a single vertical line, a symbol. You placed your hand near it. The bark was warm, too warm. You pulled back and moved on. The second lantern began to drift forward, just like the first had. It was almost hypnotic, how the soft amber glow moved with impossible grace, barely lighting more than a few steps ahead. Fog curled at your ankles. The rain had faded again, still falling, but weightless. You weren't sure when that had changed. The air had the thick stillness of a place too deep for weather to matter. And then the third lantern lit. You weren't surprised this time, only numb. The forest opened slightly here, revealing an old tree stump at the center of a shallow clearing. You stepped into the circle of lantern light, but stopped dead when you noticed something sitting on the stump. A backpack, just like yours. Same color, same straps, same stitching, and worse. Beneath it, soaked from the rain, lay a dark green journal. Your journal. You reached for it with trembling hands and opened the front cover. Your handwriting. Your name. But every page was filled with things you hadn't written. Lists of places you didn't remember going. Sketches of trees shaped like eyes. A countdown scrawled over several pages, ending with today's date. And beneath it, on the final page, when the fifth lantern lights, don't look back. You stepped away, spine cold and heart racing. The trees around a clearing swayed with some invisible pressure, not wind, presence. The backpack was gone. So was the journal, as if they had only existed while you were touching them. Your breath fogged the air now. The temperature had dropped, far colder than before. And ahead of you, the third lantern began to float forward. Far in the distance, the fourth lantern lit up. And somewhere behind you, just barely audible through the fog, came the sound of dragging footsteps. Slow, wet. Something was following now. You walked faster. The fourth lantern glowed like a dying eye in the mist ahead. And for a while, the only sound was your boots pressing into wet earth. But then there was another sound, one you could no longer pretend you weren't hearing. Footsteps. They weren't echoes. They didn't match yours. They were just behind you. Slow, deliberate. One step for every two of yours. Soft but heavy. Wet. You glanced back once. Nothing. But the moment your gaze left the path ahead, something shifted. Something subtle, like the woods exhaling in reverse. The trees behind you weren't the same trees. They had rearranged themselves. A branch that had been broken was whole. A trunk that leaned right now leaned left. The forest had moved while you weren't looking. You turned quickly back to the lantern and pressed on, breath picking up, legs aching. The air was dense now, like walking through smoke. Your skin prickled at every movement. The fog clung to your face, your sleeves, your thoughts. You felt heavy, not tired, weighted, like something unseen was pressing down on your shoulders. Just before the fourth lantern, the ground turned muddy. You didn't notice at first, but when you stopped to catch your breath, you looked down and saw them, two sets of prints, yours and another, slightly larger, barefoot. The bare feet were deeper, heavier, and always beside yours, not behind, not ahead, like they had walked with you. You fell back a step, heart pounding. The moment you moved, a faint shape passed in your peripheral vision. Not a person, not exactly. A blur, a tall one, a shape without detail, gliding behind the trees like it belonged there. You froze. It didn't look back. It didn't need to. You felt its awareness. Not just that it knew you were there, but that it recognized you, as if this wasn't the first time you'd met. The fourth lantern flared brighter. For a moment, urgently, you ran to it. As soon as you stepped into its warm glow, the air changed. It was subtle, like passing through an invisible veil. A pressure lifted. The sound of footsteps behind you stopped. The trees held still. You stood inside the circle of light, panting, waiting. Minutes passed. Then, far ahead, through trees that looked even darker now, the fifth lantern lit, dim, flickering. And you remembered what the journal had said. When the fifth lantern lights, don't look back. You stood there for a long time. The fourth lantern's glow was comforting, but only in contrast to what waited outside its reach, beyond the circle of warmth. The trees looked darker now. The spaces between them felt impossibly wide, yet too tight to breathe in. The fog was heavier. It had changed color somehow, tinted with a faint gray-green, like rot beneath water. And somewhere behind you, something was waiting. You didn't dare look back. You didn't need to. You felt it, the way your skin itched just between your shoulder blades, the way your pulse stuttered when the wind shifted. It was there, watching, waiting for the moment your curiosity would outweigh your caution. You moved forward, toward the fifth lantern. As you walked, you thought of the journal again. How had it known? The date, the order, the warning. You hadn't written it, but it had been your handwriting. Your name. What else did it know? The fog grew thicker the closer you got to the fifth light. When you finally reached it, the trees thinned into a narrow clearing, and there, nestled beneath an overhang of moss and low-hanging branches, was a small campsite, tarp stretched across branches, old metal kettle, folded blanket beside a fire pit of damp stones. The fire was burning, crackling, warm, but there was no firewood, none around the pit, none in the pile, no axe, no bark, no signs of it having ever been gathered. The flames burned steadily anyway. You stepped into the clearing slowly, carefully, The moment you crossed into it, the fog behind you stopped, as if hitting a wall. The air here was warmer. The rain barely reached the ground. It should have been a relief. But something was wrong. The fire burned too clean. No smoke, no ash. The flames danced higher when you got closer, like they were reacting to your presence. Beside the kettle lay a small wooden bowl. Inside it, dried herbs. Fresh, not soaked. A cup of untouched tea sat nearby. Steam still rose from it. You didn't touch it. Your eyes scanned the area for signs of life. None. Not even footprints. The soil around the fire was smooth, undisturbed. But the blanket was creased, as though someone had just stood up. Your gaze drifted toward the fifth lantern. It hung lower than the others. Fainter, less eager to lead. That's when you heard the noise again. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. Deep, labored, just beyond the clearing's edge, behind the largest tree. Low and wet, like lungs filled with mud. And then, something whispered from inside the fire. You've been here before. The breath behind the tree stopped. The fifth lantern flared. And without thinking, without looking back, you ran toward it. You didn't stop running until the clearing was gone. The trees thickened around you, blurring into streaks as the fifth lantern bobbed ahead, like a will-o'-the-wisp. Its glow lit only what you needed to see, just enough path to keep you moving forward, never enough to know where you were. Behind you, the breathing was gone, but the silence that followed was worse. Something had shifted above. You could feel it more than hear it, like the air had thinned up high in the canopy. The rain still fell, yes, but not evenly. Every few seconds, a patter would echo in one concentrated spot, as if the branches overhead were shaking off water unnaturally. Not from wind, from movement. You slowed. The fog was thinner here, but the dark deeper. Shadows crisscrossed the path like black veins. No, you saw no animals, no birds, no insects. You felt watched. Not from ground level, not from the undergrowth. From above. The trees here were massive. Black pine and ash twisted into sky. You tilted your head to look, and that's when you saw it. Something perched. High above, at least 30 feet up, squatting on a thick, warped branch. Motionless, human-shaped, but too long in the arms, too thin in the middle. Its limbs were jointed like a spider's, tucked tight to its sides. You couldn't see its face, only a pale oval, like skin stretched too tight across a skull. It didn't blink, didn't move, didn't breathe. You lowered your eyes again, and it was gone. You hadn't looked away. You know you hadn't. But it wasn't there anymore. The branch swayed gently, dripping rain. And then, crack, a small branch fell ahead of you. Not from wind, not from storm, from weight. You stayed perfectly still. Up above, directly above now, something moved again, just a shift of mass. Wood creaking, bark straining under claw or hand. You didn't dare look this time. The fifth lantern had stopped, hovering mid-path, as if waiting to see what you do next. And suddenly, a long, slow breath stirred the air above your head. Not yours. Then something scraped gently down the trunk of the tree beside you. A warning, a signal, a taunt. You walked forward, carefully, slowly, not running this time. You could feel the rules of this forest now. Don't run unless it chases. Don't look unless it calls. Don't speak unless the fire does. The sixth lantern blinked to life far ahead. You followed. Above you, unseen, something followed too. The sixth lantern's glow had an orange tint, dimmer than the others. It swayed gently as you approached, and something in your chest tightened. Not from fear exactly, but from the overwhelming sense that you were no longer walking into the forest, but through it, like this place had wrapped around you without your noticing. You stepped beneath the lantern's faint glow, and there it was, the stone. A large, flat slab rising at a sharp angle from mud. It didn't look like part of the natural forest. Too smooth, too precise. Covered in moss on one side, but the top was clean, as though recently wiped. Carved across its face were runes. Symbols you didn't recognize. Some were spirals. Others were long vertical strokes intersected by slashes and dots. But a few, just a few, looked familiar in a way that made your bones ache. One resembled an eye. Another, a crude stick figure with no hands. The largest symbol pulsed faintly. You leaned in, breath shallow. Water ran down the face of the stone, pooling at its base. There was something off about the way the runes caught the light, almost like the stone was breathing. Without thinking, you reached out. Your fingers brushed the largest rune, and the forest whispered all at once. A sound like hundreds of voices, quiet, layered, impossible to separate. The trees rustled violently, though no wind blew. The lantern behind you went out, and your ears began to ring. No, not ring. The same hum you felt from the very first lantern, but now it was inside your skull, like your bones had become tuning forks. The sound reverberated down your spine. Your vision swam. You staggered back. The stone stopped glowing. The runes faded. The humming ceased. Everything went still again, and in the wet ground where you'd stepped away, you saw your reflection, not in a puddle but in the soil itself. A dark mirror, rippling slightly. Your face, but not as it was. Your eyes and the reflection were white. Blank. You blinked. It was gone. A branch snapped somewhere far off in the woods. A warning. You stood and turned. The seventh lantern was lit now. Faint. Far away. And as you moved toward it, you didn't notice the new rune burned faintly into your palm, glowing softly beneath your skin. By the time you reached the seventh lantern, you noticed something disturbing. There was no sky anymore. The rain still fell, soft, steady, but when you looked up, there were no stars, no moon, not even a vague impression of cloud cover. Just blackness, a void, like the canopy had been swallowed or erased. You stood beneath the lantern, staring upward, waiting for your eyes to adjust. They didn't. The darkness above seemed to drink in the light around you. It wasn't absence, it was presence, a thing in and of itself. And the rain that fell from it wasn't right. Each drop was colder now, thicker, not quite water. It left streaks across your coat, almost oily, like the residue from burnt wood. When one landed on the back of your hand, it lingered longer than it should have. It didn't roll off. It clung. You wiped it away. The room beneath your skin throbbed in response, flaring just faintly with heat. The seventh lantern began to move. You followed, and now the trees weren't just trees. They were still bark and branch, but they had shapes. Some twisted in ways that suggested rib cages. Others leaned together as though whispering. A few bore long, deep gouges, too wide for claws, too high for animals. The ground beneath your feet squelched with every step. You passed roots that seemed to twitch, moss that pulsed in slow rhythm, like breath. The forest was alive, but wrong, tethered to something older than life. Ahead, the lantern passed beneath a tree unlike the others, towering, split down the middle by lightning or rot, its center hollow and yawning like a mouth. The air grew colder as you neared it. The rain stopped completely beneath its limbs, as though even the storm dared not touch it. And just past that tree, in the middle of the path, something stood, tall, motionless, a figure, shrouded, face hidden beneath a dark hood soaked in rain. No lantern in its hand. You stopped. The figure didn't move. Then, with glacial slowness, it lifted one hand just slightly and pointed behind you, not toward where you came from, but upward. You turned your head slowly, and above, where the sky should have been, was something glowing, faint, massive, shifting behind the blackness like a whale beneath ice. You didn't see its form, only the ripple of its shape, immense, circling, drifting through the skyless dark. And then it blinked, once. A light the size of a house flared open above the trees. An eye, pale, lidless, watching. Then it was gone. The figure lowered its hand, and the eighth lantern lit. Far ahead, without a word, you stepped past the figure. It didn't follow, but it didn't leave either. The eighth lantern cast a narrower light than the others. You had to walk closer, just to keep its glow from slipping into the fog. The rain had returned, but slower now. Every droplet hit the leaves with a peculiar sound, less like water and more like the clicking of fingernails. The silence between those clicks was unbearable, stretching too long, pulling at the edges of your thoughts. You were starting to feel watched from within, not just by the forest, but by yourself. You brushed against a low-hanging branch. It scratched the side of your arm, not enough to cut, but enough to sting. You turned to move it aside and froze. The branch was leaking. A thin line of deep red liquid ran down from where it had scraped you. Not sap, not water, blood. It dripped slowly from the wood as though from a fresh wound. You took a step back. The branch twitched slightly in the windless air, and then all the trees around you began to bleed. Tiny cuts opened in the bark. Some dripped slowly. Others pulsed. A few were dry, but fresh, the air filled with the scent of iron and wet soil. The fog swirled low, as if trying to avoid the trunks now. Then you heard it, a low groaning. Deep in the trees, like the forest was straining to hold itself upright, like the roots themselves were in pain. You looked at your arm, where the branch had touched you. The room beneath your skin now glowed brighter, pushing up against the surface as if trying to emerge. You stepped away from the trees. Suddenly, all the bleeding stopped. The forest went dead silent. No rain, no wind, no sound at all. And then something giggled. A child's voice right beside your ear. You turned sharply. No one there. The eighth lantern had moved forward, deeper down a winding path that now bent in impossible geometry. The trees leaned inward so far they seemed to arch into a tunnel. And all along the ground were branches, dozens of them, all cracked and wet, all bleeding. Each one pointed toward the next lantern. You walked slowly now. The branches along the ground felt too deliberate, like they hadn't fallen, they'd been placed. Some were snapped clean, others twisted, as if something had torn them down with care. Each bled faintly, and their dark sap seeped into the dirt like ink into old paper. The eighth lantern floated just ahead, pausing at every turn in the path. The forest around you was no longer just trees. It had become a kind of architecture. The trunks arched like pillars. The moss grew in spirals. The undergrowth was almost gone, replaced by soft, flat earth. It was a corridor now, and then the fog deepened again, fast like a tide coming in. You could barely see your feet. The lanterns glowed dimmed, swallowed by the mist. Still you followed, one hand outstretched, heart thudding. Then you heard the voice, a whisper first, then static, crackling through the fog as if filtered through a broken speaker. Cutting in and out. Not. There, hello, don't follow. You stopped cold. The voice was distorted, but familiar. You strained to hear more. Wake up, please. You have to listen. It's not a dream. It broke again. Then silence. You tried to call out, but your throat caught. The air here wasn't just cold. It was dry now. Too dry. Your breath felt wrong. Thinner. Echoey. The lantern flickered once, then went out. The path vanished. Panic crept in. You turned in a circle, squinting through the fog. All was gray. No direction, no shape. Then the voice returned, louder now, closer. You're not supposed to be here. It sounded like you. Your voice. Your tone. And from mist ahead, a shape emerged, tall, lean, shivering as it stepped into view. It was you. Same clothes. Same face. Same eyes. Except its mouth opened far too wide. And when it spoke again, the words poured out in reverse, a string of gibberish syllables collapsing on themselves like a dying cassette tape. Your double twitched violently, head jerking sideways. And then it lunged into the fog. You turned and ran. Blind, heart hammering. Branches tore at your arms. Mud sucked at your boots. Somewhere in the dark, the rune on your hand flared hot. And just when your legs began to give, the ninth lantern lit, right in front of you. You collapsed beneath it, gasping. The fog held still around the light. And in the silence, you heard the voice again, normal this time. Broken, tired. Don't let it catch your breath. You stayed crouched beneath the ninth lantern for a long time. The air within its glow was heavy, but still. Safe, in a way that felt conditional. Like the light didn't protect you. It simply paused whatever hunted in the dark. A boundary, not a sanctuary. Your breath slowed. The fog kept its distance now, circling the lantern like an animal too cautious to strike. But every so often, you heard the same voice, the one that mimicked yours, repeating fragments of things you'd said in the past. Laughter, too, your laughter, warped. You moved on, slowly, following the soft orange light as it began to drift again. And then something strange happened. After maybe 10 minutes of walking, the lantern stopped above a rotting tree stump. One split down the middle, covered in shelf fungus and gray moss. You paused. It looked familiar. You turned slowly. Behind you, the forest was the same. Too familiar. You stepped forward again. Another few paces. Another mark. A ring of stones beneath the tree. You'd seen it before, hours ago, when the fourth lantern led you past it. You turned fully now, looking left, then right. Every detail was identical. The bark with a spiral scratch. The roots in the shape of a handprint. The tree that leaned just slightly too far over the path, like it was eavesdropping. You'd been here already. The path had looped. No, worse. The path had doubled back without you ever turning. You tried to retrace your steps. But now the fog behind you was thicker than before. The light of the ninth lantern dimmed quickly when you turned toward it. The moment you faced away, when you weren't looking, it brightened again. It didn't want you going backward. None of them did. You turned again, heart pounding. The 10th lantern lit in the distance. And now something was different about the air. Every breath you took felt borrowed, like the oxygen had been used before. It carried a memory of lungs that weren't yours, a scent you couldn't place. Something had followed you through the loop. And then the laughter came again. But this time, it was closer. This time, it was louder. And this time, it didn't sound like you. You don't remember falling asleep. One moment, you were standing beneath the 10th lantern, the forest spinning softly around you. Each breath thick with dread, each thought heavy with the loop you couldn't explain. And the next, you were seated by a campfire. The flames were high, crackling. The rain had stopped. You were warm, dry, and wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled faintly of smoke and pine. Your pack lay beside you, neatly zipped. Your boots were off. None of it made sense. You looked around. The trees were still there, but they looked different, fainter, dreamlike. Their edges shimmered, as if the firelight was refracting off a film of glass you hadn't noticed before. The ground beneath you was dry, covered in fresh pine needles that hadn't been disturbed by weather or footstep. And across the fire, seated perfectly still on the other side, was someone. They weren't moving, just sitting, facing you, legs crossed, hood pulled low over their face, not speaking, not watching exactly, just there. Their entire body had the stillness of something long dead, or something waiting for the wrong moment to move. You tried to speak. No sound came. Your voice caught in your throat, like you'd forgotten how to shape language. You opened your mouth again, but the only thing that came out was a whisper. Who are you? The figure tilted its head, just slightly, then leaned forward, slowly, into the light of the fire. Its face was yours, your eyes, your mouth, your skin, but the eyes didn't blink. The mouth didn't breathe. It was like looking into a wax sculpture made of memory, a version of you frozen in time, expressionless, not hostile, not curious, just empty. And then it smiled, the kind of smile that pulled too wide, that split at the corners, that let you see far too many teeth. You jerked backward, and the fire exploded upward, a burst of sparks rising high into the sky, and you woke, gasping, alone, lying flat on damp leaves. The fire was gone, but the coals were still warm. Your boots were beside you, untouched, and standing 10 feet away, faint and flickering in the mist, the 11th lantern was already lit, waiting. You rose, still shaking, and behind you, where your body had lain, were footprints, but only the leaving kind. The 11th lantern waited farther away than you expected. Its glow was dimmer now, like it had burned too long in too much fog. You walked toward it slowly, shoes damp from the earth. Your arms ached, Your neck felt like it had been held at a strange angle for hours. The trees had changed again. They were taller here, thinner. They creaked in the breeze like ships adrift in deep fog, groaning as they swayed together. You could see less of the sky than ever before, not that the black void above offered much comfort. Still, you felt watched, worse than before. Not hunted, not stalked, known, as if the forest had memorized you now. Every weakness, every fear. You passed a tree with a deep slash in its bark. Long, clean, too wide for an animal. You slowed, tracing your fingers across the edge, and then you noticed something. There was skin beneath the bark, just a glimpse, a patch where the wood had curled back, and underneath, it looked like muscle, pale and slick, like the tree was only a shell. You stumbled back. The bark sealed itself. You weren't sure if it had been real. The fog was thick here, curling in strange patterns that almost formed words if you looked too long. The 11th lantern pulsed. You pressed forward, faster now, but with every step, the forest made less sense. The roots didn't connect. The trees didn't cast shadows in the direction the lantern lit. And then you heard it again. Not your voice, not the child's laughter. Something else. A sound like something chewing. Wet, rhythmic, close. You turned slowly. The forest behind you was empty. Then came a whisper, not from the air, but from the tree beside you. It exhaled. You came too far. You backed away, heart pounding. The bark on the nearest trees rippled. Slowly, breathing. One of them cracked open, just slightly, not wide, just enough for an eye to peek through. A pale, lidless orb, yellowed, fixed on you. The eye blinked once, horizontally, then vanished. You ran. Branches clawed at your arms. The trees leaned inward, trying to touch you. The chewing sound grew louder. Only when the 11th lantern was directly overhead did it stop. You collapsed beneath it, panting. The forest stood still again. But now, every tree around you bore the same mark, scratched into their bark, a vertical oval, and inside it was your name. You didn't want to keep going. Not after seeing your name carved into those trees. Not after seeing the bark peel back to reveal flesh. You wanted to sit beneath the 11th lantern and wait for dawn, if dawn even existed here. But the lanterns didn't allow rest. Not for long. Their light pulsed with quiet insistence, a rhythm that tugged at the back of your mind, like a heartbeat that wasn't yours. So you walked again, deeper into a stretch of forest where the trees thinned and the earth turned soft underfoot, almost sponge-like. You'd entered a grove, a perfect circle of trees taller than the others. No underbrush, no stones, just damp soil and a deep, unnatural silence. At the grove center, the 12th lantern hovered, still, waiting. You stepped into the grove, and the moment your foot crossed a boundary, the forest began whispering, 1,000 voices, low and frantic, overlapping each other like wind through leaves. But there was no wind, and these weren't leaves. They were words, your name repeated, fragments of things you'd said in the past, apologies, lies, secrets never spoken aloud, a chorus of your own voice turned back at you, each one buried in breath. Don't leave me. I didn't mean to. They'll never find out. You fell to your knees. The whispering grew louder. The air vibrated, humming through your teeth. Your skin crawled, and beneath the surface of the soft earth, something moved. Not just one thing. Many, slithering slowly beneath your hands. You tried to stand. The whispers stopped. All at once. Silence returned so sharply it made your ears ring. Then crackling, dry, right behind you, you turned slowly. One of the trees at the grove's edge was splitting open. The bark split down the center with a noise like tearing paper. And from the crack, a hand reached out, pale, too long in the fingers. Root-like, another followed. Then came the face. Yours, but aged, decomposed, hollow-eyed and slack-jawed, with skin drawn tight across bone like parchment. Moss grew along the chin. The eyes were sockets. It smiled. Its mouth moved. and in your own voice, thick with soil and time, it whispered, "There's always another version of you buried here." The 12th lantern flared bright, blinding. You shielded your eyes, and when the light faded, the grove was empty again. Only the soft churn of the earth beneath your feet remained. You moved on, slowly, and in the distance, where the path resumed, the 13th lantern had already lit. The path narrowed. The 13th lantern hovered just ahead, low to the ground, as though reluctant to rise. The closer you came, the more the trees bent inward, not broken or wind-blown, but bending themselves like servants kneeling before something unseen. You stepped carefully, and the fog began to lift. Not vanish, lift as if retreating upward into the void above, revealing a clearer view of the forest floor than you'd seen in hours. The trail was thick with fallen leaves now, wet, glossy, copper red. They stuck to your boots with every step. And then you noticed the rain had stopped, not everywhere, only here. You held out your hand. No drops fell, but you could still hear it. Rain falling all around, like a memory of sound playing on loop. You reached the lantern. Its glass was cracked. Inside, the flame sputtered, and for a moment it flickered in patterns, almost like shapes, almost like letters. But they disappeared before you could focus. You knelt to inspect the base. It was anchored this time. Unlike the others, which had floated, this one had been planted, rooted in the mud, and scratched into the metal of its base. The rain hears what the roots forget. You stood slowly, and that's when you heard it, soft at first, then clearer. Footsteps, not behind you, not in the trees. Above, you looked up, and for the first time, you saw the rain falling in reverse. High above the canopy, just visible through breaks and branches, the droplets rose back toward the black sky, defying gravity in slow spirals, like smoke being drawn into an unseen mouth. You watched in horror as a single shape descended from the opposite direction, from below the reverse rain. It was crawling, head first, down the underside of the void, its limbs long and bent the wrong way, its face nothing but smooth bark stretched over shape. No eyes, no mouth, but a neck that turned too far. You stepped back. The trees didn't move. The air was dead still. But the shape stopped above you and listened. You didn't move. And in that stillness, you realized it was listening for the rain. But here, beneath the 13th lantern, the rain didn't fall. It remembered. You waited until the shape drifted back upward into the dark. Only then did the trees begin to part again. And far ahead, faint but steady, the 14th lantern came alive. The rain began again, softly this time, whispering through the leaves like an apology. You didn't trust it. Every droplet felt heavier now. The way it landed on your skin was off. It didn't slide or soak. It stuck, as if the forest was trying to mark you, claim you. You kept moving toward the 14th lantern. It hovered lower than the last. And as you approached, you saw what surrounded it. Tree trunks, hundreds of them, each marked with carved names. Not scratched, etched, precise, deep, neat as gravestones. You walked between them slowly. Every trunk bore a single name. Some were common, some ancient, some in languages you didn't know. But they all had one thing in common. They were names spoken aloud, names once called across fires, whispered in sleep, shouted into forests like this one. You came to a halt in front of one particular tree. Your name was on it, not once, 3 times, etched vertically, spaced out down the bark like a timeline. You reached out, hand trembling, and as your fingers touched the carving, the bark breathed, a slow inhale, deep and hollow, and from inside the tree, a voice you've forgotten answered. Not the forest's voice. Yours, you as a child, laughing, asking questions. The kind of voice only tape recorders and memories remember clearly. You jerked your hand away, and the sound stopped. You stepped back. The tree exhaled, slowly, softly. Then, from a tree beside it, another voice emerged, this time angry, hurt, one you remembered shouting in a storm long ago. And then another, whispering regret. Dozens now. Every tree began speaking at once, a rising cacophony of yourselves, the parts of you you'd buried, the words you'd swallowed, the names you'd tried to forget. They spoke over one another, louder and louder, until you covered your ears. But it didn't stop. It was inside you now. Then, from the heart of the grove, came a single note, clear, deep, like a bell. All sound stopped, even the rain. And in the center of the circle, the 14th lantern flared, revealing something that hadn't been there before. A door, not part of a structure. Just a freestanding wooden door in the middle of the forest, wrapped in vines, humming faintly with a heat you could feel from here. It had no handle, just a keyhole, and just below it, written in the grain of the wood, "Name yourself truly or pass in silence." You stood there a long time, then you stepped forward. The door loomed before you. No hinges, no frame, just a tall, weathered rectangle standing upright in the mud, its edges swallowed by creeping vines and moss too vibrant to be natural. The keyhole pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. You circled it once. No tricks, no path around, just the same phrase carved into the wood, weathered but legible. Name yourself truly or pass in silence. You said nothing at first. The lantern behind you flickered, dimming with each breath. You could feel the pressure building in the forest around you, the stillness of hell breath, like a room waiting for a confession. You thought of the names you'd worn over the years, the ones others gave you, the ones you gave yourself to survive, the ones you buried. None of them felt whole. You looked down. The rune on your palm was glowing again, faint, unsteady. You raised it to the door. Nothing. You whispered your name, the one from before all this, the one on your ID, the one they call in waiting rooms, in schools, in soft moments with people who once felt safe. The door remained closed. You stepped back. The trees groaned in the distance. And then something behind the door shifted. Knocked. Just once. A slow, hollow sound from the other side. You swallowed hard. This wasn't a test of memory. It was a test of truth. So you said it, softly, a name you hadn't said in years. One that didn't feel like a label, but a shape. Not who you were when you entered this forest, but who the forest had peeled you back into being. The moment you spoke it, the rune on your palm burned, bright and hot, and the door opened, silently. No hinges creaked. It just split, like the air folding in on itself. Beyond it was not a hallway, not a path, but a chasm, an endless space of black water beneath a skyless dome of fog. A wooden plank path stretched over it, rickety and rotting, lit at distant intervals by hanging lanterns, 15th, 16th, and more, disappearing into shadow. You stepped through the door, and behind you, the forest sighed, not in relief, but in recognition. The door vanished behind you, not closed, gone, as if it had never been there at all. You stood at the start of the wooden path, the air around you heavy and without movement. The space you'd stepped into was vast and circular, like a buried cathedral. High above, the mist churned in slow spirals. Below the plank walkway, a lake stretched in every direction, still, black, and depthless. It made no sound, no ripple, no reflection. You leaned forward carefully, peering over the edge of the path. The surface didn't move, not even when a drop of rain struck it. You looked for your reflection. There was none, not distorted, absent. You waved your hand in front of the water's surface. Still nothing. You stood and looked ahead. The plank path stretched onward in a loose arc, winding like a question mark. At its farthest visible point, you saw it curve around a half-submerged structure, a shack, or maybe a shrine, half lost beneath the dark water. Just beyond it, the 15th lantern waited, barely visible through the fog. You stepped forward. The wood creaked beneath your boots, damp but solid. Every footstep echoed strangely, not outward, but inward, like the sound was falling into your chest rather than into the air. You moved slowly. The water on either side of the path was black, but not empty. You began to sense movement beneath it. Deep shapes shifting like shadows of whales. Not swimming, drifting, slow and vast and barely there. You kept your eyes ahead. Halfway to the lantern, The path narrowed. Some planks were missing, others bowed under your weight. As you crossed one particularly crooked section, you glanced down again, and this time, something looked back. A face, pale, your face, but not like before. This version had eyes open too wide. No irises, no expression, just the image of yourself hovering below the surface. You froze. It mirrored your movement perfectly. Raised its hand when you did, tilted its head when you did, but its mouth was opening, slowly, too wide. You backed away, heart pounding. The face remained where it was, expression unchanged, mouth still stretching impossibly open. You turned away and moved faster, each step growing underfoot, but you didn't stop. The water stirred more actively now. A quiet lapping sound echoed behind you. The 15th lantern burned a little brighter as you neared the half-sunken shack. You stepped beneath its glow, and only then dared to look back. The path behind you was empty, but in the water where the reflection should have been, your double was still watching. The 15th lantern dangled from a crooked iron hook, swaying gently in the mist like a pendulum. Its light was thin and tired, barely illuminating the crooked structure beneath it. A shack, half slumped into the black water. The roof had rotted through in places. The door was gone, its frame tilted inward, like it was bowing towards something unseen. You hesitated on the plank path. The shack leaned off the walkway's edge, partially suspended by tangled vines and old ropes knotted into the wood. Half of it sat above the surface, and half of it disappeared below. There was a sound coming from within, not movement, not breath, dripping, slow, steady, like something inside was leaking. You stepped carefully onto the first sagging board that led to shack. It held. You moved forward, each creak and groan of the old wood echoing off the stillness around you. The fog thickened as you reached the doorway. You peered inside. The interior was impossibly small, claustrophobic. Walls that shouldn't fit together somehow did. Hooks lined the ceiling. Old coats, soaked and stiff, hung motionless. The walls were carved with dozens of tally marks. Hundreds, maybe, and in the center of the room, a single chair, facing the back wall. You couldn't see who or what was sitting in it. Only that something was. You stepped inside. The air changed instantly. Damp turned cold. The smell of wet rot filled your lungs. Something beneath the floorboards moved. You heard it, slow, like fingers tracing the underside of your boots. You moved toward the chair. One step, two. The shape didn't move. You reached the third step, and the room breathed in. A gust of wind that wasn't wind pushed against your chest. And the person in the chair turned slightly, just ahead, enough to reveal the edge of a face. It was wooden, a mask, not carved but grown, bark shaped into something human, with grooves for eyes and a mouth that split down the middle. It whispered. You left them under the water. Your stomach dropped. You didn't know who or what, but the words pierced something deep. The masked figure stood slowly. No noise. The chair remained perfectly still, as though its occupant had never truly touched it. The figure stepped forward, arms limp, head tilted. And then it passed through you. Not around, not beside, through, and as it did, the plank floor vanished. You fell, straight through the shack, down into the water below. But the water didn't splash or break. It opened and swallowed you whole. You didn't drown. You expected cold, the crushing dark. But the water beneath the shack wasn't water, not entirely. It had the weight of water, but none of the resistance. It pulled but didn't choke. It embraced but didn't welcome. It remembered you. You sank, not fast, not slow, just down. Shapes passed around you. Gray silhouettes that pulse and ride, always just beyond clarity. They didn't touch you, but their presence rippled through your ribs like wind through an abandoned house. And then light, not from above, from below. A soft amber glow rising in a circle, and within it, the 16th lantern, anchored somehow at the bottom, swaying in the current that didn't exist. You drifted toward it, your feet touching something solid, a floor, but not wood. Not stone. Flesh. You look down. The floor beneath your boots pulsed faintly with warmth. Not dead. Not living. Dreaming. The space around you widened. A chamber, carved from some vast, sunken being. The walls rose like ribs around the lantern, which stood in the middle of the room on a low pedestal formed from fused bone and root. And behind it, seated against the far wall, a figure, wrapped in dark reeds, draped in torn cloth, its head bowed as if asleep. You stepped closer. The figure stirred. Not much, just a twitch of one arm. A low groan filled the chamber, as if the floor itself was sighing, and then the figure raised its head. Its face was hollow. Not mask, not skull, just a void where a face should be. But from it came a voice, not heard, but felt vibrating in your chest like the memory of thunder. You were too many names. You tried to speak. Couldn't. The water, whatever it was, kept your voice trapped inside you. The figure rose. It was tall, taller than it should be. Limbs swayed with too many joints, as if each arm held echoes of arms once worn by others. A cloak of roots and long hair trailed behind it, weightless in the thick air. It didn't attack. It reached out and placed something in your hand, a small black stone, warm, carved with a symbol you recognized, the same rune that glowed beneath your skin. The instant you touched it, your chest burned. The rune blazed a life through your clothing, through your flesh. And then you were pulled upward, fast, back through the dream water, back past the drifting shapes, up through the shack, up toward the surface. And when you broke through, gasping for breath, you were back on the plank path. The shack was gone. The water was still. And far ahead, now perfectly still, waited the 17th lantern. You stood dripping on the plank path, the rune on your chest still glowing faintly through your soaked shirt. The black stone from the underwater chamber rested cold and silent in your hand, its warmth gone, but its presence undeniable. You didn't remember climbing out of the water. You didn't remember walking. But your feet were moving, and ahead of you, the 17th lantern hung from a bent iron rod like a wilted flower. Its glow pulsed in rhythm with your breath. Slower now, more deliberate. The path was narrower here. And scattered along its edges, nailed into the planks, were dozens of small wooden tags. Each was burned with a single name. Some of them were smudged by rot, others blackened beyond reading. But one near your foot caught your eye. It had your name. Not once, but again. Only now, it had a second name burned beneath it. Smaller, sharper. Not one you remembered, but one you recognized. The name of someone you had once been. A fragment, a version, a choice you hadn't made but might have. You picked it up. The wood was warm. The air went still. Then another tag appeared ahead, nailed to the boards. Another version of your name. Then another. They began multiplying, along the railing, in the cracks of the planks, dangling from cords overhead, each one more distorted than the last. Some contained extra letters. Others were misspelled. One bore a string of numbers. All of them, you reached the 17th lantern. It flared as you approached. The wood beneath your feet hissed, and the tags burst into flame all at once. A ring of fire danced around you. The heat didn't burn your skin, but it pulled at your mind, dredging up things long buried, moments you'd discarded, lies you'd told yourself, faces you'd forgotten to forget. The flames whispered, "Only one of you will leave." Then silence. All the fire vanished, snuffed like candles. The tags were gone, but the path was burned now, charred black beneath your feet. You looked back. No footprints. Only ash. Ahead, the plank path resumed, more intact, leading you toward a stretch of forest that had reappeared in the mist, dark, overgrown, bristling with movement in the shadows. And lit from within that wall of trees was the 18th lantern. The trees returned without warning. No transition. One moment you were walking over water. The next your foot struck earth, wet, uneven, root tangled. The path curved upward now, sloping into a dense, unfamiliar section of forest. The rain had stopped again, but the air was colder here. thick with a scent of bark and something metallic like rust or old blood. The 18th lantern hovered ahead, pinned between two leaning trees like an insect in a glass case. Its light flickered, long shadows stretching out and pulling back, as if the forest were breathing in time with it. You crossed beneath the light. The forest closed around you, and that's when you felt it. Staring, a pressure behind your eyes. Not a presence, a collection of them. You turned in a slow circle. Eyes, dozens of them, set into the bark of the trees. Not carved, not placed, grown. Each tree you passed had a set, some small, like a child's, others wide, yellowed, blinking in slow, unblinking unison. You paused by one trunk, reached toward it. The eyes moved, not away, toward you, focusing. You stepped back. The forest shifted subtly, a realignment of roots, a soft cracking of bark, the sound of a clearing becoming aware. Then came the whispers, but they weren't like before. These didn't come from the air. They came through the trees, like wind rattling old mouths. A language you didn't understand at first. Then you did. Fragments of words emerged from the pattern, not yet whole. Too many paths. It carries the mark still. You look down. The room beneath your skin glowed again, brighter now and without warmth. It pulsed as though responding to the trees, or warning them. The eyes didn't blink anymore. They watched, judging, waiting, and far ahead, barely visible through the twisting path, a new shape waited. Not a lantern, a mirror, freestanding, cracked, tethered to the trees by strands of sinew and moss. As you neared it, the forest hushed, the whispers stopped, the trees stilled, and in the mirror you saw yourself, but not as you were, not anymore. This version of you had eyes that flickered like lantern flame, skin laced with the same runes you'd only glimpsed in moments of terror. The forest had marked this version fully, and it spoke without moving its mouth. The forest doesn't want a name. It wants a vessel. You reach toward the glass. Your reflection reached back, but just before your fingers touched, the 18th lantern blinked out. Darkness fell, and somewhere ahead in that blackness, the 19th lantern sparked to life, farther than you hoped, closer than it should be. You walked in darkness. No path beneath your feet now. Only wet leaves, broken twigs, and the uneasy certainty that you were being led, not by the lanterns, not even by the forest anymore, but by something deeper. The rune on your hand no longer glowed steadily. It throbbed like it was counting down. You moved toward the faint glow of the 19th lantern. It hovered in the center of a clearing that wasn't a clearing. Its borders were too tight, its trees too crooked. They bent inward, clawing at the sky, as though resisting whatever had made space here. This place hadn't been grown. It had been ripped open. The earth in the center was scorched, blackened. No grass, no moss, just a dead ring of ash. And in the center of it, beneath the lantern's glow, stood a figure, tall, wrapped in cloth soaked dark with time. Its head tilted as you entered. No face, just bandages. Too many, too tight, yet you felt its gaze like hot coals on your skin. You didn't speak. It didn't move. But something around you changed. The sound dropped away. Birds, leaves, wind, all gone. And then the trees spoke, not in words, in screams. Every trunk twisted, every branch curled. The forest howled within itself, agonized, angry, or afraid. You couldn't tell. The figure in the clearing raised one hand. It pointed at you, then at the rune, then down at the ground. You understood. It was asking for the stone, the one from the underwater chamber. You hesitated. It stepped closer. No footsteps, no sound, just closer. You pulled the stone from your pocket. The rune flared, white hot. The forest shrieked louder. You dropped the stone into the ash. The moment it touched the earth, the screaming stopped. Everything stopped, even the air. The figure lowered its hand. It tilted its head once more, then turned slowly toward the trees and walked into them. Disappeared without parting a single branch. The ash where the stone had landed began to crack. Not sink, not break, but open, and from it rose a stalk of something living, a thin branch, impossibly tall, curling upward like a question mark. On its tip, a new lantern, the 20th, but it was different. Its light was not flame. It was eye-shaped, and it blinked once, then turned its gaze toward you. The 20th lantern didn't hang or float. It hovered, barely tethered to the curling stalk that had risen from the ash, and its glow wasn't light. It was awareness. Wherever it pointed, you felt it see you, not like eyes on your back. Deeper, it was inside you now, blinking through thoughts you hadn't let surface in years. You turned away, instinctively. The air shifted with you. All around, the trees leaned back ever so slightly, their branches creaking as if sighing relief or fear. You took a cautious step forward. The lantern rotated to follow, the eye narrowing slightly in focus. When you stopped, it stopped. It was following your intent, not your motion. You circled it once, and as you did, the stalk curled tighter, coiling like a snake around its base. Beneath the ash, you heard the groan of something shifting, like stone or bone. You didn't speak. You didn't dare. Then, from somewhere to your left, a voice broke the silence. Don't let it see what you're hiding. It was faint, your own voice again, but not twisted, not mimicked, echoed. You turned, and between two trees, a path you hadn't noticed revealed itself. Narrow, winding, flanked by wooden totems carved with dozens of staring eyes, all watching the lantern, all blind. You followed the path. The eye lantern turned with you, but did not follow. It watched from its post as you slipped into the narrow corridor of totems, the forest pressing close again. The path was lined with leaves blackened by flame. Beneath them, the earth was dry and cracked, like it hadn't felt rain in years. You walked and walked. Time unraveled. Then, the 21st lantern flared into being ahead of you. It was different, too, hung low to the ground. And beneath it, a mask, simple, white, no mouth, just two hollow eye holes and a smear of ash across the brow like a fingerprint. You bent to pick it up, and as your hand touched it, the rune on your palm dimmed. For the first time, your reflection appeared in the eye holes. But it wasn't just your face. It was all of them, all the versions that had watched you. The mask was heavier than it looked, but you knew you'd carry it, at least for now. You held the mask in your hands for a long time. It was smooth, too smooth, cold, yet not from temperature, the way stone remembers silence. You turned it slowly, studying its features. No mouth, only those empty eyes and the thumbprint smear above them, like it had been marked by someone before you, someone who'd worn it, or someone who made it. You didn't want to wear it, but your hands did. They lifted it before you realized, the weight of it drawing toward your face as if obeying an old command. You paused, just before it touched your skin. The 21st lantern flickered above you. It didn't swing. It didn't flare. It quivered. A warning? You pressed the mask to your face. Darkness. The moment it sealed against your skin, the forest fell away. You stood in nothing. No ground. No sky. Only black, soft and suffocating, like the inside of a closed eye. Then movement. Not your body. Yourself. You were being pulled forward, not through space, but through memory. Flashes of yourself, walking these woods, but not now, earlier, before this journey began. Times you didn't recall, but somehow knew were true. You saw yourself standing beneath an early lantern. Not the first, not the second, something before those. And there was someone else with you, another figure, shrouded, hooded, face masked. They handed you the rune, the original one. Your hands shook as you accepted it in the vision. Then it ended. You gasped and were back, the mask still on your face. But now you saw it differently. Through the eye holes, the forest glowed faintly, lines of light in the trees, symbols hidden in the bark, footprints in the soil, not yours, leading toward the next lantern, the 22nd. It had appeared while you were gone, flickering softly in the near distance, casting no shadows. You removed the mask. It whispered as it left your skin. Not words, just a sigh, like it missed being worn. You didn't discard it. You tied it to your belt. You followed the footprints. And behind you, the path sealed. The footprints led forward, but they were too perfect. Unbroken, evenly spaced. Left, right, left. They didn't falter, didn't scuff, didn't drag, as if whoever made them wasn't walking at all, but gliding, just low enough to leave a mark. The path sloped downward now, the soil darkening underfoot. Not with rain. There was no rain here anymore, only mist, denser and colder than before. It clung to the trees like breath on glass. You reached the 20-second lantern. It hung lower than the others. Its glow was muted, yellow tinged with sickly green, like something that had rotted from the inside. Beneath it, the footprints stopped, but the ground continued into a tunnel, not one dug by man. The trees had bent down, their branches weaving together to form an archway of living limbs and wet leaves, slick with dew. Beyond it, blackness. You ducked inside. The forest closed behind you. The lantern's glow didn't follow. It stayed where it was, trembling gently, as if afraid to enter. The tunnel was tight, too tight. You walked hunched, then crouched, then crawling, hands pressing into damp, root-twisted soil. Each breath drew in the scent of something old, forgotten, fungal. As you crept forward, the darkness pressed closer, until you could no longer tell if your eyes were open or shut. Then sound, soft at first, a dragging, not footsteps, something being pulled. You froze. The dragging stopped too. You waited, holding your breath. Then came a voice not yours, not even human, a rasping breath strung into words. You followed your own shadow, but it's been following you longer. You turned. There was nothing behind you, only a wall of bark, as if the tunnel had sealed. You faced forward. The dragging began again, in front of you now. You crawled faster. The space narrowed to a squeeze, barely wide enough for your shoulders. Roots caught your arms. Thorns grazed your cheek. You pushed through, desperate for light, for sound, for anything else. And suddenly you were falling, not down, just out. You tumbled forward onto wet moss, gasping. And there, standing directly in front of you, motionless, was a figure from your vision. Hooded, still, masked. Only this time it held something. A mirror, small, round. It held it out toward you with both hands. And when you looked into it, you didn't see yourself. You saw the lantern path, all of it, but from above. And in the center, at the very end, a door. The same door you passed through earlier, but this one wasn't open. This one was watching you. The mirror in the figure's hands rippled once. Not glass, surface. Not reflection, invitation. The image of the lantern path shimmered across it, warping slightly as though seen through water. At its center, the door waited. Not behind you now. Not ahead. Somewhere beneath. You looked up at the masked figure. It did not move. It didn't breathe. But it waited. You felt it. Not a person. Not a thing. A function. A keeper passage. You reached slowly toward the mirror. As your fingers drew close, the rune on your hand surged with sudden heat. And so did the mirror. You recoiled instinctively, but not fast enough. The heat seared across your palm as the rune pulsed again, brighter than ever before. Not pain, not even injury, just a mark activated. The masked figure finally moved. It tilted its head, and then it spoke. Its voice came from beneath the mask, muffled and dry, like dead leaves being stirred. You passed too many gates without paying. It held the mirror closer. You saw the lanterns again, now flickering, one by one. The 17th, the 13th, the 9th, each extinguished in turn. You fell backward as the forest darkened around you. But the path ahead remained, lit by one single, stubborn flame, the 23rd lantern. You turned toward it, and the figure stepped back, fading into the mist like ink dispersing in water. The mirror dropped, but it never hit the ground. It dissolved midair. You ran. Branches scraped your arms. Roots clawed at your boots. The air thickened. each breath like pulling cotton into your lungs. The 23rd lantern pulsed ahead, faster now, urgent. You reached it, and behind it, the path dipped sharply downward into a hollow you hadn't noticed before. A sunken ring of forest, silent, still. You descended. The moment your foot crossed into the hollow, the forest shifted, the ground rippled. The trees leaned back as if retreating from something they could not name. And in the center of the hollow, the door stood again. But it had changed. It no longer looked old. It no longer looked wooden. It looked awake. Its grain pulsed with a heartbeat. Its frame was wrapped in runes you hadn't seen before. Your rune among them, glowing softly on the left side. It had no keyhole now, just a handle, wrought iron, twisted like a question. And across the top of the door, carved in the same burning script as a mask, you may leave what you carried, or you may carry what leaves you. The door pulsed gently, like something breathing just beneath its surface. You circled it once. No wall, no hinges, just a door, alone in the hollow, planted into soil that steamed faintly in the cold air. Behind you, the 23rd lantern hung in silence, unmoving, unblinking. This was not like the door before. That one had demanded truth. This one demanded something deeper. A choice. You read the words again, etched into the arch of the door. You may leave what you carried, or carry what leaves you. The meaning wasn't clear, not at first, but the longer you stood in that hollow, the more it settled into your bones. What you carried, the fear, the names, the masks, the memory of hands that weren't yours reaching from trees carved with your voice. What might leave you, the person you've been before the path, your identity, your answers, even your shape. You looked down. The rune on your palm had dimmed, but it still shimmered faintly, like coals in a fire long gone cold. And tied at your side, the mask, still, waiting. You reached up and touched the door's handle. It was warm, familiar. It vibrated faintly, like it recognized you. The moment your fingers closed around it, the forest behind you shifted. Trees leaned forward. Lanterns in the distance blinked, one by one, like eyes squinting against sudden brightness. And in the silence, something whispered from the other side of the door. Not a threat, not a warning, just a single, echoing question. Which part of you will go? You close your eyes. Your memories played in pieces. The laughing voice of yourself in the grove, the masked thing from the shack, the whispering reflection in the water, each fragment a version of you, each one real, and yet none complete. You let go of the handle, took the mask from your belt, and placed it gently at the base of the door. The moment you did, it cracked, not broken, opened, like the sound of something exhaling after years held shut. A line of light appeared down its center. Then, slowly, the door began to swing inward. Darkness waited beyond, but not empty darkness. Structured, hallway-like, walled by trees that bent at impossible angles. The 24th lantern lit within, small, low, like a whisper, and on the threshold of that new space, your shadow hesitated and stepped in without you. You stepped through the door. It closed behind you without sound. No latch, no creak, just the silence, but not empty silence. Held silence, the kind that feels like something is listening. The hallway you entered wasn't made of stone or wood, but of tree limbs grown together so tightly they became one continuous tunnel, woven like a throat. The air smelled like sleep, not rest, sleep, heavy, thick, as if everything around you had only just awakened. The 24th lantern hovered at shoulder height, set into a hollow where bark had curled inward like ribs. Its glow was soft and gold, but strangely dim from behind. You turned. No shadow. Your body stood there, but no shadow stretched out from your boots, not even a smear beneath the light. It had gone ahead, and the tunnel accepted that. You continued forward. Each step felt quieter than the last, as though the hallway itself was muffling your presence, like a mother shushing a child. The first door appeared on your left. It was made of mirrors, dozens of small fragments, stitched together like broken wings. You didn't touch it, but it flickered once, showing you a version of yourself with no face. Just a blank plane of skin, and behind it, eyes looking out from within. You moved on. The second door stood open. Inside was a room built from your voice. You could hear it echoing. Questions you'd asked in dreams, apologies you never gave, laughter from years you tried to forget. They spun like wind chimes. You didn't enter. You passed a third door, closed, pulsing with a deep red light. No sound, but something behind it knocked. Once, slowly, and then again, in rhythm with your heartbeat. You hurried past. The 25th lantern appeared ahead, resting in the open palm of a wooden hand, growing from the ceiling. It wasn't floating. It was being offered. You stood beneath it. The rune on your palm flickered, not bright, but clear, its lines sharpened, like something had decided what it truly meant. The hallway curved and opened into a chamber, not large, not wide, just deep, a pit in the center, carved, not natural, and at the bottom of it, your shadow, waiting. It stood in the dark without shape, a hollow cutout of you, but when it raised its head, it had your face, not the face you wore now, the one you had when you entered the forest, before the lanterns, before the mask. It looked at you and whispered in your own voice, "If you want to finish, one of us must stay." You stood at the edge of the pit. Your shadow stood at the bottom. It looked like you, but not the you of now, not the weathered face, the tired eyes, the hands marked by forest and fire. This one was smooth, clean, unchanged, the version that never stepped onto the lantern path, the version that stayed behind, the version the forest never met. It looked up, expressionless, but its eyes followed every twitch of your face, every subtle shift in your stance, like watching a mask it once wore. You crouched slowly, peering into the pit. It didn't seem deep, and yet no sound returned when you spoke. So you didn't. Instead, you listened. The silence bent around your breath. Then the shadow, yourself, spoke again. You walked forward while I watched. You burned names while I remembered. You changed shape while I held the mold. It stepped toward the wall of the pit. The climb wasn't steep, but it didn't climb. It rose, drifted upward, slowly, steadily, like smoke reversing. You didn't move. When it reached the edge, it hovered just beyond the boundary between pit and floor, and said, "Only one of us can carry what came next." Your rune burned faintly again. The mark on your hand had grown darker, more defined. It pulsed in sync with something beneath the room, something massive and buried, breathing in slow, deliberate rhythm. You looked into your shadow's eyes, and you understood. This was the moment the forest had been preparing you for. Not a battle, not a revelation, a narrowing. One of you had to remain here, to keep the path balanced, to hold the memories the other could not carry. You closed your eyes and opened your hand. The mask was still there, tied at your side, waiting. You lifted it slowly. Your shadow didn't flinch. You raised the mask to its face, and it leaned forward. You pressed the mask into it, gently. The moment it touched skin, your shadow froze, and shattered, not violently, not loud, like brittle ash falling in windless air. And behind it, standing where the shadow had been, was you, the version who had come through it all, the one with every name, every mark, the one who had walked the forest and still remembered who they were before. You stepped forward and became whole. The 26th lantern flared to life above you. The walls sighed, and the path opened once more. The chamber behind you faded, not like light dims, but like memory thins. The pit, the shattered shadow, the mirror mask moment, all slipping behind your eyes. Not gone, just filed. The forest doesn't erase. It rearranges. You followed the tunnel as it curved away from the hollow, each wall now marked with soft glows, faint runes, handprints, claw marks. Some familiar, some not, all left behind by others who had walked the path, or tried. You were not the first. You would not be the last. But you were further now than most. The 26th lantern burned gently ahead, swinging on a vine threaded to the ceiling like a noose turned sideways. Its flame changed color as you neared, amber to blue, then green to gold. Each hue carried a sensation: heat, wind, regret, memory, and for a breathless second, grief. You touched it and saw a flash behind your eyes. A face, not yours, not quite, older, a stranger, but one your bones remembered. They smiled once, then vanished. You blinked and the forest returned. The tunnel opened into another clearing, but this one had no trees, just stumps, dozens of them, torn and splintered, as if something massive had fallen here again and again. Roots clawed from the ground like broken fingers. At the center stood the 27th lantern, balanced on a cairn of bones. Animal, human, hard to say. The wind returned here, soft, unsure. Like even the breeze didn't remember how to move in this place. You stepped into the clearing, and the ground answered. A low hum rose beneath your boots, not from soil, but from underneath it. A shape moved just beneath the surface, tracing slow arcs around the edge of the circle. You didn't look down. You walked to the lantern. As you reached it, the rune on your palm flared again, and the ground beneath you stilled. You turned, and behind you, something began to rise from the stumps. One by one, figures, not full, just torsos, masked without bodies, arms made of bark, each lifted within by a tiny flickering flame. Each pointed at you. They didn't move. They remembered. Each one marked a version of you the forest had rejected. Each one a branch that didn't grow. Each one flickering with a choice you never made. You stood among them, heart steady, breath even, because now you understood. This path didn't lead you deeper into the forest. It led the forest deeper into you. The 27th lantern blinked once and opened a new passage ahead. Not a tunnel, a descent. Cut stairs, leading down, into a place no flame reached. Not yet. The stairwell carved into the earth was not old. It was ancient, older than the trees, older than the lanterns, older, perhaps, than the path itself. Stone steps descended at a slight spiral, slick with moss, bone-white in color. The walls pressed close, carved with symbols that moved subtly when you weren't looking at them. Each one whispered to your skin as you passed. You held no lantern now, no torch, yet you could see. A dull bioluminescence lined the stone like veins beneath thin flesh. The further down you went, the warmer the walls became. And with the warmth came memory, not your own. The forest was remembering through you. You stumbled for a moment, overcome. A vision bloomed behind your eyes. A woman, kneeling beside a lantern that would not light, her hands bloody, her eyes closed. Around her, the trees leaned in, not in judgment, but in mourning. The vision passed. You gripped the wall. You were still you, but less alone in your mind. At the bottom of the stairwell, the path leveled into a flat, wide corridor. The ceiling rose, and with it, silence became heavier. Not just the absence of noise, the presence of watching. The 28th lantern waited in the center of the corridor, not hanging, not resting, floating, suspended in the air by nothing. Its light was cold, not blue, not white, just cold, and beneath it, carved directly into the stone, was a shallow basin. Inside the basin, your name, freshly etched. You hadn't written it, but you had. It was your handwriting. Exactly. And below it a question. Who brought you this far? You blinked, and behind you, footsteps echoed on the stairs. Slow, measured, but heavy. Too heavy. You didn't turn. You looked into the basin again, and you remembered the first breath of mist at the trailhead, the lantern that hadn't lit until you stepped beneath it, the reflection that didn't mimic you, the masked figure who never spoke, but always waited. They hadn't followed you. They had sent you. You were not the first walker. You were the first key. You looked back toward the stairs. A figure emerged, cloaked, hollow-eyed, made of root and shadow. It didn't speak, but it waited. You turned back to the basin. reached into your pocket, and placed a mirror shard you'd never meant to keep. The basin drank it, and the 28th lantern ignited fully. For a brief moment, the corridor glowed with light that wasn't flame. It was understanding. And then the walls fell away, revealing a chamber that should not fit beneath a forest. Massive, endless, filled with doors that led nowhere, and one that led directly to you. The walls collapsed without a sound. Stone peeled back like old bark, revealing a space vast enough to break sense. A hollow cathedral beneath the roots of the world. Its ceiling stretched out into shadow, too high to see. Its floor was slick with shallow water, like the forest had been slowly crying into it for centuries. And everywhere, doors. Some were ancient, made of petrified wood and rusted iron. Some were impossibly smooth, stone with no seams or hinges. Others were little more than hanging sheets of moss strung between thorny branches. But you knew somehow. They were doors too. All were closed, except one. The figure that followed you down the stairwell did not enter. It stood at the threshold, at the edge of the corridor's light, and simply watched, as if its task was done, as if you were no longer its concern. You stepped into the water. It was warm, familiar. The 29th lantern lit above the single open door, its light steady, unwavering. The door beneath it wasn't the largest, or the oldest, but it was the only one that looked like home. Wooden, cracked from age. The kind of door that should lead to a cabin in the woods. You approached it slowly, your reflection trailing beneath you in the rippling water. Only it wasn't yours anymore. Not completely. It shifted as you walked. Sometimes it was taller, sometimes smaller, sometimes walking just out of sync. And then you saw it smile. But you hadn't. You looked up at the open door. There was no threshold, no frame, just the idea of one. Inside, only darkness. But not threatening, not hungry, just waiting. You stepped closer. The rune on your hand flickered violently, then steadied into a soft blue pulse. And then you heard the whisper again. Your voice, older, sadder. You've arrived at the place you left from. You touched the side of the doorframe. It felt like bark, like home, like memory given shape. A breeze passed from the open doorway. It smelled like pine and cold rain. The air of a place before the first lantern. A place you hadn't yet earned your way back to. You didn't step through. Not yet, because something moved behind you. One of the other doors, far across the chamber, shuddered, a sound like branches snapping underfoot. It began to open, and from its depths came a light you didn't understand. And the soft sound of your name, spoken by someone who shouldn't know it. The sound of your name, your true name, echoed across the chamber. Not the name the forest gave you, not the ones burned into planks or whispered in groves, but the first one, the one you were born into, before masks, before runes, before the path. It shouldn't be spoken here. And yet it was softly, lovingly, wrong. You turned slowly toward the distant door that opened without light, and yet somehow glowed. A soft, white hum leaked from its frame. Steady, heartbeat slow. The water beneath your boots vibrated with it. You took one step forward, away from the open door beneath the 29th lantern, and the forest hesitated. Something about the air around you stretched, grew tight. The figure at the stairwell still stood in silence, but now its head tilted slightly, as if listening. You took another step toward the far door, and your reflection in the water shattered, not into pieces, but into versions. They darted outward across the surface, some hunched, some tall, some childlike, some barely human. Each one turned and looked back at you. Each one wore your face, and all of them smiled at once. The door pulsed with a lightless energy, not welcoming, not threatening, just pulling. Then the voice came again, louder now, still speaking your name, but no longer gently. You left something open. The door across the chamber opened wider. Inside, you couldn't see darkness, nor light, only return. And you knew, deep in your chest, what it was. Not a door to another place, a door to another moment, to the one you thought had been sealed. You approached slowly, Each step peeled away a layer you didn't know you wore. The sound of the water faded. The chamber dimmed. The lanterns along the ceiling winked out. One by one, the 29th remained, holding steady, waiting for your choice. You stood between the two doors now. To your right, the home-shaped door beneath the lantern. Familiar, true. To your left, the pulsing wrong door, humming with memory you tried to forget. The voice came once more, from inside the humming door. If you do not return for it, it will come for you. You stepped toward it, close enough to see what was beyond. A room you hadn't seen since childhood. Too exact to be dreamed, too old to be real. And in its center, a mirror, covered by a sheet. Still, waiting, you stood at the edge of the open door. Inside, a room that shouldn't exist anymore. It smelled like old bedsheets and pine dust. A child's room. Your room, once. Perfectly recreated down to the way the window was slightly ajar, letting in a breeze that didn't belong to this place or time. You stepped through the door. The forest fell silent behind you. Not distant, gone. The walls here were soft with the hush of forgotten time. The carpet matted, familiar under your boots, even though your boots didn't belong here. Neither did the runes still glowing faintly on your hand. You looked to the center of the room. The mirror, its shape was unmistakable. Tall, oval, mounted on a wooden frame that still bore the scrape from when you knocked it over at age 7. You hadn't remembered that scratch until just now. The sheet over was yellowed, thin, barely concealing what waited beneath. You moved closer. The air grew warmer, but not comforting. The heat of something watching from just behind glass. A presence trying not to breathe. You reached out. Your fingers brushed the fabric. It was wet with what you couldn't say. You pulled it back and saw nothing. The mirror was a flat gray surface. No reflection. No room behind you. No forest. Just flat. You leaned closer, and it leaned back. Not your reflection, but something using your shape. Its head tilted the wrong way. Its shoulders slightly too high. Its arms longer than yours. It smiled gently, and then it knocked on the inside of the glass. Just once. The sound echoed through the room like a drum underwater. You stumbled back, but the figure didn't follow. It raised its hand and placed it flat against the mirror. You saw the rune on its palm, not like yours, more complete, etched deeper. It whispered, no sound, only shape. You are not done. You stepped forward again, drawn. The mirror's surface rippled once, not inviting, just opening, and from behind you, the sound of the other door slamming shut. You turned too late. The room was no longer yours. It never had been. You stood in a box of roots and bark, shaped like memory, scented like lies. The mirror stood behind you now, and through it, the forest looked in. The mirror behind you pulsed. Not like light, not like breath, like thought. It wasn't showing the forest anymore. It was becoming it. Trees bent in impossible loops across the glass, their branches growing and twisting in real time, reaching out and curling around your silhouette without ever leaving the pain. You stood frozen, not in fear, in understanding. The forest wasn't watching you anymore. It was studying you. Each movement, each breath, each hesitation, fed back into the mirror like ink bleeding into water. It learned your rhythms. It learned your doubts. And slowly, it began to change. The room cracked, not at the walls. At the edges of truth, the floor beneath your feet softened, turned to loam. Ferns sprouted from the corners. The ceiling vanished in a shimmer of black leaves that blinked once before fading upward. Your room was gone. What remained was the idea of it, folded into forest. And still, the mirror pulsed. Inside it, you remained, but not still, not watching, moving. That other you, shaped like you, but worn thinner, was walking away down a path of flickering lanterns. Lanterns you hadn't seen. Lanterns that hadn't existed before now. It was making its own way. You reached toward the mirror instinctively. Your fingers didn't touch glass. They passed through. Cold, damp, alive. The mirror wasn't a barrier anymore. It was a skin, and you had been peeled out of it. Behind you, roots twisted downward into a staircase of knotted wood, unlit, leading somewhere the forest hadn't dared show you before. You turned from the mirror and stepped onto the first root. It moved, only slightly, just enough to know it was aware of your weight. You descended slowly. The mirror whispered behind you, not words. Your name, but wrong again. A syllable added that shouldn't be there. A sound too deep to be human. You didn't look back. The further you descended, the more the light changed. Not darker, redder. A deep ember glow began to pulse from somewhere far below, and with it came sound. Wet, like breathing through leaves soaked in blood. You reached the bottom of the roots. The 30th lantern waited, stuck inside a tree grown inward, like a mouth forced shut around flame. Its light seeped out through cracks in the bark, and just beyond it, sitting on a fallen log, was someone else. Not you, not the figure from the stairs. Someone new. They looked up and smiled. Their eyes burned like coals. And they said, "I've been waiting for the one the forest marked first." The figure on the log didn't rise. They sat as if they'd always been there, knees together, hands folded, head tilted just enough to unsettle. Their smile was not cruel. It was welcoming. And that made it worse. Their eyes, coals, yes, but coals that burned without heat, like the last embers of a fire someone else had died beside. The tree holding the 30th lantern creaked softly as you stepped closer. Its bark peeled open slightly in your peripheral vision. Not bark at all now. Ribcage. You turned your attention back to the figure. They wore no mask, but their face should have had one, because what you saw wasn't a face. It was an echo, flickering, your own features spliced with strangers. Too many, shifting every few seconds. A collage of regret. They spoke again. You took the path, but it was always a circle. They gestured to the forest behind them, where no trees grew, only arches, dozens, formed of twisted wood, hung with broken branches and draped moss. Each arch held a lantern, each one burned red. These are the paths that bent, the ones that refuse their end. And now they loop until someone chooses their center. You didn't respond. The weight of what they said was already sinking. You looked at the arches and realized each was identical. You'd seen them before. Every lantern, every turn. You had walked one of them already. The figure nodded, watching the realization bloom across your face like mold on memory. You left something at the beginning. They said, "That's why I followed." You asked, "What did I leave?" Their smile didn't change. That depends on which version of you ask. From their pocket, they withdrew something, a chain, and at the end of it, a small, rusted key. They held it out to you. This is not a way out. It's a way in. You didn't take it yet. Your rune burned on your palm, then faded completely. Cold now, empty, waiting for your choice. You asked the figure, "If I take it, what changes?" They looked up, eyes no longer cold, now mirrors, and they said, "The forest stops leading." And you start remember what you came here to do. You reached forward and took the key. The arches opened behind them, all of them at once. But only one led down. Only one bled light. You stepped toward it, and the 31st lantern lit, without fire. It screamed. It wasn't a scream of voice. It was a light that screamed. The 31st lantern burst to life the moment your foot crossed the arch. Not with warmth, not even with brightness, but with memory turned inside out. Every secret you thought you buried, every image you flinch away from your own mind. It lit them all at once. You staggered, your vision blurred. The path under your feet rippled like breath across skin. Shapes moved through the soil, shadows without bodies, dreams that hadn't finished forming. They reached toward your ankles, not to grasp, but to remind that you had brought them here. The lantern pulsed harder, and the scream grew louder, not in your ears, but in your teeth, your spine, your ribs. Like your skeleton remembered something the rest of you tried to forget. The key in your hand pulsed cold. Still waiting. The figure who gave it to you was gone now, not vanished, just never there. Ahead, the new path descended again, this time into stone. Real stone, wet and old, like it had waited far too long to be walked again. You pressed forward. The 31st lantern dimmed behind you, but never stopped screaming. It would not let you go unmarked. As you walked, the stone corridor opened wider. The air smelled of wet leaves and smoke. A strange, twisting blend of memory and fire. You turned a corner and saw what the lantern had been screaming toward. A room, circular, walls carved with hundreds of runes, not etched but branded, scorched in. At the center, a table made of black wood, and upon it, a book, bound in ash bark and stitched with thread pulled from forest root. It was open to a single page, blank, except for one line. Write what the forest cannot remember. Your breath caught, because you knew what it meant. The forest remembered everything, except the truth you had refused to speak. Your hands moved on their own. You stepped forward and picked up the charcoal beside the book. The air grew still. The 32nd lantern flared somewhere unseen, and you began to write. The charcoal in your hand felt warm, almost alive, like the root it had once been still remembered what it grew beside. The whispers under soil, the cries caught between layers of bark. It pulsed faintly, sinking with your heartbeat as you lowered it to the page. The words didn't come from thought. They came from the place thought fears, where truth festers. You began to write, not in sentences, not even in language you recognized, just marks, shapes, a rhythm that pulled itself from your wrist as if your hand no longer belonged to you. The moment the charcoal touched the page, the air tightened. A sudden silence fell, not the gentle hush of the woods, but a silence like something holding its breath in the dark. You kept writing, and as you did, the runes on the walls began to bleed. Thick black sap oozed from their carved grooves, dribbling down the stone and pooling around your boots. It smelled like sorrow you weren't ready to claim. You stopped. The last symbol sat crooked on the page, as though trembling. It wasn't beautiful. It was accurate. The forest around the chamber groaned. Trees above, if there were trees above, bent inward, and from behind you, the mirror door opened again. Only this time, you were already in the room, and you stepped out of it. Not the you that had walked the path, not the shadow from the pit, not the reflection. Something older, more worn, the version of you who had turned back long ago, the one who remembered why you first came to the forest. It looked at you and asked, "Did you write it down this time?" You nodded. It approached and placed a hand, your hand, over the mark you'd written. The page flared once, then turned transparent. You both looked through it. Beneath the paper, beneath the table, beneath the earth itself, something stirred, a sleeping root, the first root, twisting slowly around a heart made not of blood, but of story. And it was waking. The 32nd lantern flared red. The chamber rumbled. The rune on your palm lit again, brighter than ever, and then cracked. Not broken, opened. It unfolded like a wound into a symbol older than your language. You looked up. The other you was gone, but the words remained. The forest never forgets, but it needs someone to remember. The book closed on its own, and from above, a rope of light fell down, soft, trembling, calling you up. The rope of light dangled above the blackwood table, swaying gently as if stirred by breath. Not wind breath, the kind that exhales just before a name is spoken. You looked up. There was no ceiling, just darkness shaped like canopy. Yet the rope shimmered with certainty. A direction, a demand. You stepped onto the table. The book throbbed once beneath your boots. Not anger, not warning. Recognition. The forest understood now what had been written, and what had been released. You reached for the rope. It wasn't rope. It wasn't even light. Your hand passed through it, and suddenly your arm was gripped by branches. Thin, endless, gentle. They curled around your wrist, then your forearm, pulling you upward with a slow rhythm of dream logic. You didn't climb. You rose. The chamber fell away below. The walls pulled back like curtains in reverse, closing slowly over the blackwood table. the bleeding runes, the book still humming beneath its closed cover. And above you, the branches carried you through layers of forgotten canopy, each level stranger than the last. One layer was stitched with webs that reflected faces, but only the ones you didn't want to see. Another passed through a clearing of stillness so deep it muted even the memory of sound. You rose through a layer of wind that smelled like your childhood bedroom, exactly as it was the night before the forest first entered your dreams. Your eyes stung, but not from wind, from something letting go of you as you ascended. A weight you'd grown so used to, you thought it was yours. The branches slowed, came to a rest. You were deposited gently into a cradle of bark and moss, high in a canopy where the air thinned into silence. Here, the 33rd lantern hung from nothing. It turned toward you and whispered with a voice you hadn't heard in many parts. Your own. You are not a visitor anymore. You are part of the story now. The moss beneath you shifted, revealed steps, spiraling upward through hollowed trunks, where stories were burned into rings of age. You climbed them, and with each step, you saw memories not your own. A boy bearing a tooth beneath a tree and hearing it whisper. A woman walking backward for 7 nights until the forest agreed to listen. A group of 3 entering together, but only one shadow leaving. These were the others, the ones who had written in the book before you. And still, the path kept going. You reached the top, and the tree opened, not like a door, like a wound healing in reverse. And through it, the 34th lantern, burning bright, at the entrance to the place where stories bled into real. The wound in the tree widened, the bark peeling back with no sound, no violence, just solemn purpose, like it had waited decades for this very moment. For you stepped through and entered a world that did not look like the forest, but felt more like it than anywhere you'd ever been. This was the heart, not a beating organ, not a central point on a map, but a truth-given shape. Here, the trees did not grow up. They spiraled sideways, folding over one another like fingers around a secret. Their roots pulsed faintly with orange light, like veins carrying molten memory. The ground squelched gently beneath your boots. Not mud, not moss, but pages, tens of thousands of pages, all soaked and matted together. Some charred, some scribbled in shaking hands, some completely blank except the faint shape of a tear. Above you, the sky churned with silhouettes. Not clouds, creatures of thought, ideas too old to be remembered clearly, moving like whales through a sea of dust. The 34th lantern floated in the center of it all, suspended between branches that didn't touch it. Its flame burned low, blue, flickering like it might vanish any second. But when you approached, it steadied, and from somewhere deep within the forest, so deep it might have been beneath you, a sound rose. Not music, but rhythm, breath, heartbeat, footsteps, and the rustling of pages being turned in unison. You turned around. Behind you stood a figure you knew. You had not seen them before, and yet you had. They were every story you had not finished, every version of yourself you had abandoned. They wore a coat made of every mask you left behind on the path, each one stitched together at the seams, their eye holes weeping ink. They didn't speak. They only held out their hand. In it, a quill, not metal, bone, the same bone you saw in the cairn beneath the 27th lantern. They offered it wordlessly. You took it, and the ground beneath you, those soaked pages, shivered in response. A spot open at your feet, blank, waiting. The 35th lantern lit behind you, and a voice echoed, not aloud, but in every corner of the place, right the ending you fear most. You knelt, the bone quill burned cold in your fingers, and the page beneath you exhaled. You knelt in the forest's heart, surrounded by pages that pulsed with memory, written, forgotten, rewritten. The bone quill in your hand shook, not from fear, but from recognition. It knew what you were about to write, because you'd already written it. Somewhere, somewhen, the 35th lantern behind you flared, casting long shadows across the spiraling trunks. The figure in the mask-stitched coat no longer moved. They were part of the canopy now, arms raised like branches, face turned skyward. Waiting. You looked down. The blank page before you shimmered slightly, refusing stillness, as if it wanted to be written on, but didn't want to know what you would say. You placed a quill to it. It bled before you even wrote. Not ink, memory. The truth spilled across the page, forming letters your mind had hidden deep. The forest never meant to let you go. Your hand moved without your permission. The next line carved itself out slowly. If you leave, it must follow. A chill slithered up your spine, not from cold, but from understanding. This wasn't just a place you entered. It was a place that had entered you. Every lantern lit was a door cracked open. Every step forward was an invitation for it to step forward too. And now it was almost through. Your eyes blurred. You tried to stop writing, but the quill kept moving. The ending you fear most, it wrote, is the one where it doesn't forget your name. You dropped the quill, but the letters kept appearing. From beneath the page now, clawing upward through soap paper. You carried it too far. You lit too many doors. You gave it shape. The page began to smolder. Smoke rose, not acrid but sweet, like the scent of the first night you walked into the forest. Lanterns flickering gently in rain. And from the spiral of trees around you, eyes opened, dozens, some human, some not, each blinking slowly, each trained on you. The 36th lantern lit, high, far above you, suspended in the branches where no hand should be able to reach. Its light didn't glow downward. It pulled upward, a reversal, a choice. You looked back to the page, now fully aflame, the words burning away, but their meaning stayed, etched in your breath, in your shadow, in your real name. You stood, and the ground shuddered. Far away, at the beginning of the path, something woke, and it remembered you. The flames on the page died without ash. No smoke, no char, only absence, like the words had burned backward, erasing even the moment they were born. The ground beneath your feet rippled. The forest sighed, not in peace, but in preparation. You looked upward. The 36th lantern, far above in the canopy, now pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat on the other side of sleep. Its light wasn't reaching down to you. It was calling something up. Behind you, the spiral of trees twisted tighter, not violently, deliberately. The space was closing, becoming singular, a funnel toward what came next. You turned and saw the first tree. Not a tree, the tree, massive, bark like burned velvet, hollowed at the core, runes carved into its skin with something older than language. From its center, something emerged, slowly, delicately, not a creature, not quite a person, but a shape you recognized from every dream you thought you'd forgotten. The one who watched you sleep when you were too young to name fear. The one who walked just behind you every time you turned around in the woods. The one who never needed a name because they remembered yours. It stepped forward. Its face was your face, but only when unlit, when unseen, when blurred in a mirror, just waking from fog. It smiled and spoke without mouth. You invited me in. You stepped back. It did not follow. It didn't need to, because it had always been where you were going. The thrum of the lantern above grew faster, and the ground behind it being cracked, just slightly from within the crack. You saw something you didn't want to understand. Not fire, not light, not even shadow, but repetition. A loop, a version of this moment happening again and again and again. Each time, slightly different. Each time, slightly closer. You spoke aloud, asked it why now. It tilted its head, your same gesture from 2 nights ago by the fire, because this is the first time you truly meant to leave. And then it stepped aside, revealing a path behind it. No trees, no lanterns, only your footsteps, already imprinted in the mud. You hadn't walked it yet, but the marks were there, leading forward. The 37th lantern lit, and it wasn't above you anymore. It was in your chest, and it was burning. It burned without heat. The 37th lantern, inside you, a flame behind your sternum, steady and soundless, yet loud in its presence. Every breath you took stoked it, glowing brighter not from air, but from intention. This fire was not fueled by wood. It was fed by remembering. Behind you, the echo of yourself, the thing that followed, watched, mimicked, waited, no longer lingered. It had stepped aside willingly, without resistance. Not defeated, not angry, just finished. You turned toward the footsteps in the mud. Your footsteps, your future, waiting in reverse. The path ahead looked simple. Clean, no roots, no mist, no traps. But the forest doesn't show you a path like that unless it's a lie. You stepped forward anyway, because a flame in your chest pulled you, not outward, inward. Every step brought a memory, not a vision, a full feeling. The warmth of your childhood blanket. The tremble in your fingers the first time you saw someone cry and didn't know how to help. The dream you had when you were 5 where you followed a light and couldn't wake up for hours. They returned not to haunt, but to fill. You were being remade by the very things you left behind. You passed the 38th lantern. It stood unlit. It bowed slightly as you passed. No longer needed. No longer brighter than the one within. The forest grew quiet. Not dead, listening. Waiting to hear what shape you would take next. Up ahead, the sky broke. Not cracked, opened. A single shaft of moonlight cut through, perfect and pale. Beneath it stood a mirror, not like the others. This one was simple, honest, not glass. Still water, perfectly still, and in its surface, no forest. Just you, not younger, not older, exactly now. And you saw the flame inside your chest glowing through your reflection's ribs. The mirror shimmered, and a voice, not yours, came through. Old, cracked, almost kind. If you step through now, you carry it with you. Not the forest, the knowing. You asked, what happens if I don't? The voice answered, then someone else will. You look behind you. No one there. Not yet. You stepped to the water's edge and saw the 39th lantern flicker inside your reflection's hand. Your flame was spreading, not consuming, illuminating. You reached down, touched the water, and your hand passed through. The surface gave way like breath. No splash, no ripple, just a soft unmaking of the moment you touched it. Your hand disappeared into the stillness. Then your wrist, then your arm. It wasn't wet. It wasn't cold. It was weightless, as if time itself forgot to apply pressure here. You stepped forward, and your body passed through. The forest vanished behind you, not gone, just sealed, folded. The moment you crossed completely, everything shifted. The sound of insects and distant wind gave way to silence without expectation, a silence that had never heard your name. You stood in a place between places, a space made of twilight and slow breath. Sky above, but no sun. Ground beneath, but no soil. Only a flat plain of softly pulsing ash, as though you walked atop the embers of dreams too faint to ignite. Ahead, the 40th lantern. But this one was different. It didn't float. It didn't hang. It grew, tall and winding like a tree, spiraling upward. Its trunk made of intertwined flames held still by memory. At its center, a hollow, like a keyhole, like a chest, like the space behind your own ribs. You approached, and the flame inside your body pulsed brighter in response. The lantern tree leaned slightly toward you, and whispered, not aloud, but inside every version of you. To carry the forest, you must leave the path. The flame in your chest flickered wildly. You stepped closer, and without speaking, you knew. You weren't here to finish the path. You were here to end it, to seal what had been opened, to be the last lantern. If needed, the ash beneath your feet began to lift, soft tendrils rising like smoke, curling into symbols you didn't recognize, yet understood. The names of those who had walked before you. Each name passed through your skin as a flame inside you consumed them gently, not erasing, carrying. The lantern tree opened, a space in its base peeled wide, beckoning. Inside, roots wrapped around a cradle of fire. No words, no promises, only a choice. To place your flame there was to leave behind the forest as a place, and become it as a memory. You stepped into the hollow, placed your hand on the cradle, and the 40th lantern lit from within you. Your hand met the cradle of roots. The flame in your chest flickered, hesitated, then surged forward, drawn as if by gravity that only memory could obey. It passed through your ribs, through your palm, into the cradle like a sigh coming home. For a moment, nothing moved. No sound, no breath, just stillness. Then, the lantern tree shuddered. Not violently, not in pain, in acceptance. Its bark rippled outward, colors shifting from coal to gold. Roots lifted from the ash and wove into the air like dancers, spinning slow arcs as they reached for the sky that wasn't sky. And all around you, the plain of ash pulsed once, twice, then bloomed. First moss, then roots, then trees, new ones, young but familiar, stretching up to the fading dust like bones made a story. Each one bore a lantern, not replicas, not echoes, but children of the light you had carried. They did not glow to guide, they glowed to remember, and in that light, the path you had walked began to unwrite itself. The arches, the mirrored doors, the cairns and screaming fires, not erased, absorbed. The memory of them lifted into the air as thin lines of ink, winding upward into the new trees like nutrients. Your body felt lighter, as if something that had always pressed into your spine was finally letting go. The flame in your chest was gone now, but not extinguished, just shared, dispersed. You turned slowly in this new forest that bore your breath, your fear, your truths. And in the far distance, a single figure stepped into view, a child, no older than 10, wearing boots too big and a coat too thin, looking around wide-eyed at the trees that now whispered in your voice. They held a tiny lantern in their hand, unlit, waiting. You watched as they looked down at it, then up at the branches. Then, as if sensing something, they turned and looked directly at you, eyes wide, not afraid, but asking, "Can I walk it too?" The forest answered in silence. You did not speak. You only knelt, touched the earth, and in doing so, lit their lantern from within the roots themselves. It flared once, steady, warm. The child smiled and took their first step forward. Behind them, the 41st lantern lit. The child took a second step, then a third. The roots did not rise to trip them. The branches did not reach. The forest watched, not as a hunter watches prey, but as a story watches its next page. You stood still, invisible now in the way old things are, not gone but woven in. The trees whispered in a language the child did not yet know, but they would. You could feel it. Each step they took brought a faint echo, not of footsteps, but of memory remembering itself. The forest was no longer recursive, no longer hungry. It had found something new in your sacrifice. Patience. The child turned slightly, looking back, toward where you stood, though they could no longer see you. But some part of them felt you there. Their lips parted, just enough to whisper, "Thank you." And that was enough. You turned from the path. There was no longer anything pulling you forward. No more doors to open. No more mirrors to haunt. Instead, the new forest spread around you like the inside of a deep breath. Each tree bore a different lantern, no longer uniform, no longer screaming. Some glowed violet, some blue, some flickered like candlelight caught in sleep. And there, at the very edge of the still-growing woods, was a bench carved from the bones of the old story, covered in moss, warm from the light of the 40th lantern. You sat, and for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, you closed your eyes not in fear or fatigue, but in rest. Behind your eyelids, the forest still bloomed. Paths not yet walked curled through shadows. New names whispered themselves into being, and within all of them, a piece of you lingered. Not trapped, not burdened, just remembered. From somewhere far above, the 42nd lantern lit with a slow, golden sigh. Its light did not seek. It welcomed. The bench beneath you was warm with something older than fire, a warmth that asked for nothing, that gave simply because you remained. Above, the forest breathed, not in wind, but in rhythm, Each lantern flickered in time with it now, no longer a sequence to follow, but harmony of all that had been carried. From a heartwood tree at the center of this world, new branches had begun to reach outward into the dark places, not to reclaim them, but to light them gently, offering paths to those who might come next. You sat in stillness, no longer holding the flame, no longer separate from it. You were it. The child was long gone now, walking their version of the story. Others would follow, each different, each needed, and through them the forest would continue, not as a trap, not as a riddle, but as a memory that grows. The 43rd lantern lit just beyond your vision, then the 44th, then a wave of them, spreading outward in all directions, like stars choosing their own constellations. A gentle sound rose beneath the earth. It was not the scream of the lantern that had tested you. It was a lullaby, low, woven with your voice and every voice that had whispered in fear and hope beneath trees older than names. The roots beneath your bench shifted slightly, tucking you deeper into ground, not to bury but to plant. And for the first time, the forest offered you something you had never been given before. An ending. No door, no choice, no fear, just completion. You looked up through the branches and saw the 45th lantern drifting down toward you. It hovered just above your chest. And when it touched you, it dimmed, not out of weakness, but because you no longer needed its light to see. You closed your eyes and dreamed not of forests, but quiet paths where others walked in peace. And as you faded into that dream, the last of your breath curled into the roots, and from it a single blossom grew, small, bright, and wholly yours. The blossom opened with no sound. A single petal unfurled, pale as moonlight on untouched snow, glowing faintly in the hush of the roots that cradled it. Around it, the forest stilled, not in fear, not in reverence, but in recognition. You were no longer a traveler on the path. You were the path, not stone, not dirt, but memory pressed into earth. And the forest, at last, understood what it carried for so long. That stories are not meant to trap. They are meant to be released. Above, the canopy stretched wide. Lanterns drifted freely now, untethered by branch or structure. They circled gently overhead, swaying in winds that weren't winds at all, but the soft exhale of those who walked before and those yet to come. One by one, the last lanterns lit, the 46th pulsing with the sound of your first step beneath the rain. The 47th glowing softly with the warmth of fire that never went out. The 48th flickering in time with the footsteps of the child who still walked somewhere far ahead. The 49th silent and bright, carrying the echoes of every scream turned into song. And then, the 50th. It did not flicker. It shone, pure, white gold. It hovered above the blossom you left behind, and in its light, the roots around it twisted upward, not to enclose but to raise, to lift the memory of your journey into something living. A tree bloomed from your resting place, tall, thin at first, then wide with purpose. Its bark bore no runes. It needed none. Every ring of its growth held a version of the path only you had walked, no longer repeated, no longer watched, remembered, forever. Rain began to fall, soft and slow. It pattered against the canopy like fingertips on paper, not washing anything away, just welcoming sleep. And somewhere far from this place, on the edge of another forest, in a room barely lit by twilight, a traveler stirred. They would hear the call soon. They would find the first lantern waiting for them at the trail's mouth. They would step forward, and the path would begin again. But you rest now. The fire you once carried glows in the roots of a forest that no longer hunts. It dreams, and in its dreaming it keeps you close. The forest sleeps with you now, and it will never forget your name.